Okay, so here we are. We have Ableton. I've made this little project file, called it Lo-Fi House Tutorial. Set it to 125 BPM, just standard tempo. And I've made these little markers for every part of the song. So we just have like a pretty standard house arrangement. There's nothing too crazy with that as far as lo-fi house goes. It's pretty just kind of standard. So we got a little intro, 2 breakdowns and builds, and then 2 drops, and then an outro. So pretty standard. So the first thing I want to touch on is I'll open up. These are the sounds I have down in the description below. You can download them for free and play with them all you want. I'll also have this project file in there. So the first thing I want to touch on is the cassette noise. So in here, we have a few different ones. Just some that I had laying around, some samples. And that's a very important part of this style. A lot of times what these producers tend to do is similar to like with what a lot of people do in like future bass intros and stuff, where they'll put like vinyl noise. A lot of times people are putting these cassette noise samples just throughout the track, just to add some atmosphere and some texture to it. So that's what we're going to do. We just have this one in here. And so I've just dragged that in and made it the length of the song. I'm going to just hit Complex Pro real quick. So the next piece of this track is I have this little sample loop that I pulled. Just like a little sort of 90s or 80s style, like electronic piano type loop. And you can get your samples from anywhere. Just anything that sounds cool. But I'm going to pitch this one down. And we'll do -4. And let's hear that with the noise. Okay, so already you can hear that the vibe is there. It's also just now occurring to me that I made these named wrong, so whoops, but oh well. So I'm going to drag this. I'm going to have this in all of these parts except for the outro and the first 16 bars of the intro. So we just have that. And now I'm going to do some processing to these, and then I'll show you afterwards what I did. Okay, great. So what I've done is I turned the cassette noise down a little bit in volume and put the A Bit Warmer Saturator preset on there. And what that does is just sort of gives it a little bit more crunch, a little bit more texture, makes it a little bit warmer. Just kind of really pulls it all together. So that sounds like this. And then what I did was on the sample, I'll start with what I did at the beginning. So I put this low pass filter on here and just set it to about there. What that does is it just makes it a little bit darker sounding. So I'll take off this. Whereas without it, just kind of makes it a little bit more lo-fi, a little bit, like I said, darker sounding. After that, I added this Ableton reverb. I kept everything stock except for the dry wet, I believe, and the decay. And that's just to give it a little bit more ambiance, a little bit more atmosphere, a little bit more texture, like we're doing with all this. A very important part of this is like you want to give your sounds a lot of texture. You want to give them a lot of atmosphere. Like you want them to feel not just dry. That's what makes this style so interesting. Is just the texture of the sounds. So going with that, after all this, I added another A Bit Warmer preset saturator on here, and that just sort of gives it a little bit more warmth, makes it a little bit fatter, and a little bit more texture, like I said. So that sounds like this. Okay, cool. So that's where we are now. I'm going to turn down the noise a little bit. And last, I just added this low pass filter here, and I automated it in this part of the intro, the second 16 bars, because I wanted to sort of fade in. Like, as you can see, it does this. So that just gives it a little bit more of a fade. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to add in a kick. So what I'm going to do is add a new MIDI track, Control Shift T. And I have some kicks in this pack. They're just like some Process 909 kicks. A lot of the drum sounds in lo-fi house are just made from lo-fi like 909 recordings, and taking standard 909 recordings and making them a little bit more lo-fi with distortion and saturation and compression and all that kind of stuff. So anyway, we have this kick. I just dragged it onto here and made a new sampler. And we're just going to make a little pattern with that, just a standard 4 on the floor. So I'm going to do a little bit of processing to this kick, and then we'll dive back in as well. So I didn't do too much. The first thing that I did, I'll turn this down a little bit actually, is I normalized the sample, which just takes the gain and stretches it a little bit to fit the sampler. You just right click on here and then hit normalize volumes, and there we go. Then I added a bit warmer, just for a little bit more like crunch and thickness. But I turned the drive down because stock it was a little bit too much. So I just put it down to here. And now it's just adding a little bit of a bump. And the last thing I did was I added a little EQ back here, or over here. I boosted the low end a little bit, and I want to touch on that in a second. I boosted around like 100 hertz because that's about where you want your kick to be. And then I boosted the high end a little bit. And I cut a tiny bit around like 250, I guess, 300. But the reason for boosting the low end is because with this style, not in every song, but in this particular track, the way I've set up the sounds going into it, a lot of the low end sometimes comes from the kick. Like, you don't always have like a bass line that's just pumping and pumping and pumping. A lot of times you just might have like a kick that has a lot of low end and maybe some toms, and that's your bass line. So in this case, that's what we have. Now, let's fill it out a little bit. So what we want is, I'm going to make a drum rack actually, and I'm just going to put in some hi-hats and a clap. Whoops. And I have a few in here, a few claps and a few hi-hats for you to choose from. Okay, so now we're going to add some hi-hats. So we just have this. Great, we'll unwarp that. I'm just going to make a little pattern. Usually you just kind of want to use very standard house patterns. Like when you're making this style, you want to imagine that you're just making a 90s house track, but it's sort of underwater, so to speak. So we got this. So that's pretty cool, but it needs a little bit of swing. We want it to be kind of a little bit more groovy. So what we're going to do is select our offbeat hi-hat, which is this one, and just move it back a little bit. You can see I have the grid like this. So now we got a little bit more swing in there. I'm going to turn this down. And so now we're going to put in the clap. So something I've noticed they do a lot in these tracks is they'll take the clap and put it on the 2 and 4 as is standard on these kind of beats. And but they'll move it a little bit forward, similar to like that, similar to like what a lot of people do in like future bass, and obviously Flying Lotus and stuff. Everybody's known for doing that, and it gives the drums a very interesting, more like human feel. So we have that. I'm gonna turn it down a little, and I'll put some more, a bit warmer on here. So it's a little bit fatter. So let's play that with the kick. And this is the part where you start to play with like the placement of the clap. But you can see it's doing a little bit of interesting stuff by being a little bit before this kick that hits here. It feels like a little bit dirtier, a little bit more, just a little bit more interesting. So all together now, our track is sounding like this. I'll play it now. Great. So now I'm going to copy this over to the intro and the second drop and the outro. And in the first half of the intro, I'm going to get rid of the clap. So we have that. Now, the next thing here is for the second half of our drops, we want a little bit more interesting stuff. And we also want to make a build in here. So I'll show you how to do that. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to get a ride and put it in this drum rack, unwarp it. And we're just going to make like a simple pattern with it. I've noticed Mall Grab does this a lot. So if you're a fan of Mall Grab, there you go. So what you do is you just do like the kind of standard techno house thing where you put, it's like on every 8th note, and the first one is the velocity. You turn it down a little bit. And then we'll just duplicate that over. And there we go. I'm going to turn this down a little bit. Now we just need a little snare for the builds. And this is sort of not something you have to do in every track, but in this case I want to try it. So I'm going to turn this down a little bit. I'm going to make a MIDI clip like here. Okay. Also have a crash in here. I'll put one more drop. Alright, then we gotta turn that up a little bit. And we're clipping, so I'm gonna turn everything down. We're just gonna go like that. Just select all of them. Great. So now I'm going to copy that over to drop 2. Build 2, I mean. And then we're going to copy this over. And this is the one with the ride. So we're also going to put that in the outro. And we'll copy these crashes over. And this pattern is used a lot. It's the one from a lot of deep house tracks where the crash does like this. It'll be like so that's always good to use. I'll put that at the beginning of the track as well. So now we're starting to get a pretty fleshed out track. This is a good foundation to build on. Obviously it's not like a finished track or whatever, but it's definitely something to go from. But the last thing we need is a little bit more low end, because if you hear like in our drops, we're getting a bit from the kick, and I mean it's in there, but we definitely could use a little bit more. So in this track, we're gonna do something a little bit interesting. We're gonna use some toms. I have these 909 toms, and if you notice, they have a lot of low end to them, and they've just got a very good texture. So I'm just gonna put them in a drum rack. And let's see how this sounds. Okay. That's good for now. And like I said, you can tweak this as well. I'm going to give this project file out. I'm just going to put this in here. Okay. So we've got this little drop here. So with these toms, you pretty much just want to do the same kind of processing you did on all the other sounds. Maybe a bit warmer. These, but so we got a little groove here. That'll give us, that gives us something to work from. But as you see, it's not really as intimidating or like crazy as it seems. It's pretty simple. It's just a matter of good sound choice and not overcrowding it. As you see, we really have very few sounds in here, and everything is only doing one thing. Like, it's just doing the thing that it's supposed to do. Like, there's not a lot of low end in the sample, so we have a bass and a kick doing that. And that's really what's key here. These tracks are just very well produced, and there's not a whole lot to them as far as like processing or anything, or crazy sound design or anything. It's just really tasteful sampling and really cool sounds. So, alright, so that's it. I hope you learned something today. Like I said, there's not really a lot to it, but there are a few little secrets I don't think are really out there. So I wanted to show you some of that. And yeah, if you liked what you heard, please like and share this video and subscribe and maybe drop a comment. The samples are in the description, as well as my social media and my Twitch. I try to stream every day, or at least several times a week. So yeah, thank you so much. I hope you have a great day.